Hey, I'm Sarah Smith, family doctor, clinical day advisor, and the chatting coach. Welcome back to Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast, where we're going to be interviewing peers or world experts who can help us think about our clinical day in a way that is more sustainable and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today we have with us special guest Dr. Lillian Emlet. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. Tell us a bit about you.
So, I am founder of Transforming Healthcare Coaching. We provide leadership plus well-being coaching for leaders of all professions in healthcare through the different inflection points in their leadership journey. We coach healthcare professionals of physician, nursing, NP, PA, pharmacists, anywhere as you grow as a person. Life happens. And so to be able to maintain both the well-being and the leadership of your own life as you take on more responsibilities for other people's, your teams, your organizations, your patients, it's really important to have the support behind you. I'm also a practicing adult critical care physician and emergency physician. I am an associate program director. I've been a mentor and teacher and simulation educator for 20 years and professor here in Pittsburgh.
Very good. Okay. Most doctors have been talking about the pit, actually, which is interesting. Sounds like you live and work it.
Yes. Yes.
Tell us a bit about your journey through your clinical career, things, challenges, or things about being in emergency and critical care that you faced as you went along.
Yeah, in the beginning, after I graduated, I did 100% critical care medicine. And I was told at the time that if I wanted to do any emergency medicine, it was on my own time. So I started my career, I always say 110%, because I moonlighted on the side in addition to a full-time academic job doing full-time adult critical care. And then the first 5 years, just like the literature and the papers show, that is when I had my first burnout episode in terms of I was doing too much 'cause I loved everything so much. I was really building my career as an academic educator, doing simulation, doing all the things I loved. And plus, because I was unwilling to give up my second specialty and not fit everything into just 100% FTE, that's how that ended up happening. But then over time, I started to realize my academic growth, my learning growth, and what I love to do could become more streamlined and tighter over time. And it was really only until the pandemic that, throughout those next ensuing 15 years, I had grown to national notoriety, developed national programs, very happy with everything I was doing, obviously recovered from burnout, no problem. I had a kid. And then the world shut down because of the pandemic. And the pandemic was my first pause because obviously national conference was really we had a pivot. I was the chair of the Congress that year, and we pivoted from an in-person Congress. And I was now leading a virtual, first time ever Congress. It was our 50th anniversary. It was a special Congress as well for our specialty in critical care. And it was the first time I began to pause to like wonder, is this it? My life is an N95 and dealing with opening the COVID unit 2 times in that year. And so I started to think through how am I going to, what's really important? And at the same time, I was going through a divorce, and also my mom got sick at the same time. And so, for the first time, I reached out for help. And the person I reached out to was a coach because I wasn't depressed. I wasn't sad. I just needed someone which mentor is going to help me through divorce, caring for your mother, dealing with COVID, and your academic career all at the same time. There's really very few mentors who have that exact Venn diagram. And so after a time when I was helped by my own personal leadership coach, I realized there's so many people in healthcare that could be helped with coaching. Why do we not offer coaching to people throughout their entire journey in life as a professional? And the bigger thing is because I work with so many different professions, RT, NPPAs, pharmacists in the interprofessional team in the ICU. I was like, why don't we all have coaches, not just physicians? As I investigated further, physician executives and nurse executives would get coaches, but not all of us on the front lines. So I decided to go back to school, got my ICF, did all the things to become an accredited coach, go through the appropriate channels to investigate all of those things, and form Transforming Healthcare Coaching, and then also formed a team of all the coaches at my company are all trained in energy leadership coaching, also either practice or are still either part-time or full-time practicing clinical medicine, plus also coaching, because we feel like we understand. We really understand all the professions where they're coming from. So I have a PT, I have an OT, I have a PA, and I have another physician on my team.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Take us back to that first burnout. What was it looking like? What did burnout look like for you that first time round? And what was it that helped you return to a busy and very demanding role?
So I think when I think about when I burned out when I was younger, it really was a lot of self-expectation, right? Because the academic world has all of these other invisible rules that are not just your clinical day-to-day life. There's all these productivity measures of writing papers and doing research projects with very little support. I think for me, it was about just taking a step back and learning self-care skills. Back then, there was a conference I went to that's no longer in existence. And for the very first time, I discovered mindfulness and meditation. I didn't know about any of these things. The whole conference actually was on burnout. And one of the speakers introduced me to mindfulness meditation. She actually is the Mindful Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico, Michelle Duval. And I loved it. And I was like, oh, I probably need to investigate all of this. Of course, I went and took a local integrative medicine here in Pittsburgh, 8-week MBSR, and discovered that a few other surgeons, other people have taken this course, and just making sure there was enough mindfulness and awareness and slowing down and being intentional. And that mindfulness is not about emptying your brain, it's about actually honing attention. If you can pay attention to your breath, or pay attention to either the mantra or pay attention to the eating, what you're touching, if you can pay attention, you actually get things done a lot faster and with more precision and with greater accuracy. And so I then began, as it began my journey into the well-being space. I actually am the well-being curriculum director for our fellowship. And it's been 15, 18 years of studying the science and realizing there was so much evidence for mindfulness. So I probably will credit mindfulness, MBSR, and this particular burnout conference with teaching me skills and my own personal evolution over time to learn more things.
Yeah. Do you think that the learners who came in after you, who learned some of these things earlier, do you think they had a better chance of having perhaps less burnout? Is that the experience of this, or what do you feel like it gives the learners to have this skill earlier?
It's funny you say that because I think that's the one interesting that I don't know that we all have great data yet in terms of in our curriculums for well-being programs, and even though there's ACGME mandates for us to incorporate this into our training programs, I don't know that we have longitudinal programmatic data because each individual is their own control to some degree. We can't predict when a stressor in life is going to cause more problems and whether or not just by teaching the skills, having the skills, that people will know which of the skills, right, that you should use in a given time. I will say that what's interesting just from a sociological phenomenon. 10 years ago, when I first started meditating at orientation and doing some of our sessions, because I've incorporated mindfulness and narrative medicine and different things at different times, very few people, like one person, meditated. Now, multiple people raise their hand. So I think from
Mhm.
a culture perspective, society is more willing to think and talk about meditation pretty freely. The apps, whether they're paid or free, have helped. And I think just popular culture and awareness of well-being have allowed more people to tap into to recognizing that.
Got it. As you were introducing some of these wellness things to your team before you got a coach, was there some element of a difference in the mentorship? So how you mentored students, did that include some of the mindfulness or well-being or wellness type talking and discussion? Do we need external coaches or could we do this as peers for each other? What are you thinking?
I think there's a role for all types, right? So I think in terms of external coaches versus internal coaches, like the ones that are provided by your organization versus peer. And then I'm just differentiating the two because internal coaches could be trained coaches who are certified, but may not be in your exact profession as compared to peer coaches, is that you're perhaps potentially in this same profession or same discipline, right? Like it could be an MD coaching another MDDO to another MD. I think there's different roles for each of those. And I think as external coaches that are really very agnostic and that also someone has paid for, as compared to most internal coaches and peer coaches are at very low cost or just included in the developmental process. They work quite well for most things. And then at some point, sometimes you want to branch out into something completely unknown. And I think that often may be a challenge sometimes for internal coaches who really, and peer coaches who have been really trained on same kind of thing. The conversation structure is the same, the skill set is the same. But I think the what you get coached to do, like whether it's new innovations or completely finding something like outside of medicine or outside of the clinical context, outside of your leadership context locally, like for example, would you go to an internal coach for your organization when basically you're trying to figure out how do I leave? How do I get promoted and leave and go to another organization? That's something you may not want to coach with internally about. And I think a lot of us have big dreams. I think a lot, especially this next generation, as I've watched sort of the requests come in from our trainees, the younger generation are much more diversified than probably you and I. Like you and I are just like, we just do the one thing. And now we realize you can have more than one hat. And how do you negotiate more than one interest, right? And with non-completes and non-disclosures and all of those things. And I think internal coaches may not have as much facility to feel like with face validity that this is oh safe. I could totally talk to you about my new invention that I want to go pursue tech, for example.
Yeah, got it. Okay, yeah. So there's I see what you're saying, and there's a role for things that could be helped locally, but also thinking bigger and cooler things. Tell us about this, I guess what you described as almost a second burnout, but perhaps not thinking about it as a burnout, but there was life happening to you. Your role as a child, your role as a spouse was changing, and you looked elsewhere. You went out into the world and said, who can help me? It's about that journey for yourself, the journey of how did you find your person? What did that look like? Where did you fit that into your busy days?
Yes, I think my coach and I laugh about this. I actually can't remember how I found her, but we think it probably had to have been actually, ironically, on a podcast because you go searching for information, right? And so a lot of times we go on YouTube, we go off the internet. And for me, like I love podcasts. I always have. And so I would like put in the search bar, divorce, how do I get through this? And surprisingly, there's a lot of ways to get educated on all kinds of things. So as you're scrolling through and consuming different podcasts, you sometimes you really resonate, right, with some of the conversations that you have, and then you start investigating and you follow up, you search the internet, you follow people for a while, and then at some point you just basically decide for yourself, enough is enough. I need to do something, and so let me take action. And then with taking action, I think is the first big step, and it feels really good to take action, and then the rest really follows from there. I'm sorry, I missed it. There was the second part of the question I needed to answer.
Oh, my next part was where do you fit coaching
Oh,
in? So, what did it look like to actually do the coaching? Was there homework? How often did you meet with your coach? That sort of thing.
yeah, so in the beginning, it actually was more intense. I think I do remember now that when things were really hard, and this is, I think, the greatest irony that I always remember for myself is when things are really hard, you have to self-care more,
Mhm.
which is ironic because most healthcare people I know, they basically make a bunch of excuses and then actually fall off the bandwagon and spiral into burnout. But when things get hard, you have to do even more. So I was weekly with her, and then I became bi-weekly, and now we're once a month for maintenance with my coach. And I do remember it's important enough that you make a priority. I think in some ways for me, you start to realize, for example, after I had my child, I know that with you, with your community is all about how do I do things when I'm supposed to do them, and so that I can be who I'm supposed to be in the time allocations I want them to be, right? To be a parent, to be able to be in the pickup line, to be able to be on the PTO. Because I also was the co-treasurer of PTO for many years and a fundraiser for my kids' school, and obviously now becoming more of a single mom. So you are able to do the things when you're really intentional. And it actually was having my daughter 12 years ago that helped me realize I can't take it home.
Mhm.
I have to be more efficient, so I'm pumping and charting at the same time. And thank goodness we get private call rooms. It's very doable. Even responding to in-house emergencies, it's a mindset shift where you are the most important person. And I think once for motherhood, for me, I think that was the trigger. Like other humans are dependent upon me. So it really behooves myself to really care for myself. And I think since then, it's always been when things get hard, you care for yourself more. People ask me often, like, how did I get through the pandemic? Opened the COVID unit multiple times. I worked out 2 times, 2 hours a day. Like I literally worked out all the time because self-care became even more important.
Okay, where did you work out? Is that inside the hospital or did you go to work out before?
Peloton. Peloton. Bought my,
Peloton at home. Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah, Peloton at home. Yes, yeah, no. Because I think that's the other thing I also didn't realize. When I started to see my own trainees have their acts together better, where they were on the Peloton, they were exercising in the pandemic, they were doing things for themselves. I'm like, oh, this is highly embarrassing that you can have your life together and I'm making excuses still. So there were definitely a lot of signals. And so then I decided to go ahead and join them and okay, I can do this too. And so I think that's the other thing too. I think for very young clinicians and older clinicians, I don't, the demographics, learn from your colleagues. No matter what age they are, in terms of it's really smart what they're doing. And it ended up working out. And I still have belong with Peloton because whenever life is really hard, I've tried to go back to the in-person hot yoga, but you waste 35 minutes getting there. And for some people, it's like you often waste an hour to and fro to these workout classes. It's not worth it for me.
Yeah, and that's what I hear, the obstacles to getting to exercise and getting to class. Like we can see how, yeah, it's good to prioritize, but I don't have a 45-minute round trip ability to go and do that thing. And so it's just understanding how did you fit 2 hours in the middle of COVID while running a COVID unit, while critical care as what, how did you do
Yep,
that?
it's cutting away the annoyances. And the traffic wasn't bad back then, right? The traffic was wonderful for us because they literally shut down all the roads for so long and everyone pivoted virtual. I have to admit, now it's so much worse. I had a very hard time exiting out of the pandemic. I know this is very strange for most listeners to hear, but I really enjoyed a lot of things about the hybrid and the virtual space. 'Cause that's when I went to coaching school. So I have cried and learned and got certified with over 60, 30 people. Like I've met other people. They were the people I saw the most. And I still keep in touch with them. So it's interesting how a lot of people felt insulated or they didn't reach out, but you just need to pivot to whatever the modalities of the time. And so go all in on virtual. And even, for example, obviously all of our coaching practices changed too. A lot of coaches were initially in person, but now it really created a blossoming of the coaching industry because we can now have much greater scope and accessibility to people, businesses, and groups.
Yeah, yeah, we certainly live in new times, that's for sure. Tell us a bit about leadership. You talk about leadership at all levels, and what does that mean from your perspective? How would we know that we need to go and do something more about building leadership skills?
There's two flavors. I would say one is leadership that as a title has been given, bestowed upon you or that you applied for, right? You are now assistant nurse manager or you are now chief of, I don't know, emergency medicine, right? The one could be title related, but then the other one becomes, do you see yourself as a leader of your own life? And I think a lot of times if you feel frazzled or overwhelmed or stuck, then I would say you're not leading your own life. And that's just like just a normal person, right? In terms of you feel like your schedule or your responsibilities or the burdens of how society is doing things to you is dictating everything. And it's really hard to break out of that because when you're deep in the unhappiness, it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And you can only rise slowly over time. And really, the question is, what else do you have to lose, right? If you feel like you're just feeling frazzled all the time. So I call that more the self-leadership side of things. That obviously has more foundational things in terms of your sleep, your nutrition, your relationships, and what we call the wheel of life in terms of making sure that if your cup is full, then you have more ability to handle conflict, efficiency, productivity, mindset, things that may be holding you back. So we always focus first more on the things like the health, the mental and physical health. But for the people who are in any kind of position, I would say I wish in retrospect, it would be pretty amazing if I actually had just someone to support me through those initial titles of becoming associate program director. Part of it is just trying to figure out how do you add on additional responsibilities and where is it going to, just like your questions, where is it going to come from? Where on your
Mhm.
calendar can you double dip? Where are you going to streamline a little bit? Where can you delegate? Where can you basically begin to start to say no? Or basically, I always tell people say yes for a time limited trial. Yes, I'm going to try it for 6 months. I will take the director position for 1 year. And then by then it will work its way out, right? Like in terms of what other adjustments do you need to make in your personal life? Do you need to get the cleaner at home? Do you need to ask your partner to do a different work schedule? Those kinds of things will happen naturally as you adjust. But with coaching, I do think those are the times. Is the greatest amount of stress is that as you think about a position or a promotion, as you begin to pivot a little bit in terms of other responsibilities, those are always great times to have additional support so that your structures are in place so that you can be like, I'm good for a while until you fall off the wagon. Because we all fall off the wagon and we just get back on again.
Yeah, absolutely. Things change, life happens. You were talking about team and using team and the delegating of tasks. So some of the things on the home front in terms of spouse might need to change their work hours or I might need to hire a cleaner. But what about within the role? So if you take over a role from somebody else, often you'll be given a flavor that they had for that position. But then that's not necessarily going to fit into your mold. We see that you have different things on play in your life and at work. So tell us about how that could look in terms of the leadership skills.
Yeah, so it's really interesting you say that because I just remember like back when I was like interim chief for education, there was always like these millions of meetings on your calendar. And you're like, why are there so many meetings? What is the
Mm,
point of having an executive leadership on this particular committee in general, especially when you're not in the weeds doing anything? And so I think the question is always coming with just an open mind and curiosity going and seeing where what your role is and then also just touching base with whoever's leading and just be like I'm not sure that this is necessary. It could go from 4 times a month to like once a month, just touch base. It could go into a totally different reporting structure. And it's mainly because the last person was very interested in quality and patient safety. And so that meeting ended up on her calendar because she loved that particular area.
mhm.
And it wasn't necessarily that the role absolutely had to require it. It's just that was a personal interest of hers. And so as the assistants to the executive leadership, they're like, oh, all of her meetings just get moved to the new person. And so until you settle into your role and try to understand, and then also to be clear with everyone, like I'm here just to understand like what is the role and where we might be able to streamline and change and improve. And if we don't ever take an assessment of that, we can't also innovate, right? So that you can't be bogged down with old projects if you're not going to move to new ones, right? Because there's also other portfolios within that responsibility where if you want me to write a new grant and write a new funding stream and do all these other things with this entire other department, you push comes to shove, right? You have to be able to prioritize and make it clear to everyone. So I think that probably be my own personal example of as you go into a position being curious, just being open, and also working with your team to understand better. Because a lot of times it's just innocent. It's innocent misunderstanding that like that was her passion interest. Doesn't mean it has to be every person's passion interest.
Yeah, I really like that. The whole analogy of you might feel trapped in your life right now and you're not sure that you're having any choice about your schedule or your kid pickup times and all of these types of
Mhm.
things, all the way up to you've got Chief and Chief is now filled up your calendar with all these meetings. And again, you're feeling trapped and overwhelmed that why do I have got all these meetings? What the heck? And that ability to say, wait. Where's my ability to say yes or no and starting that transformation of what is important, what isn't important to me about this role or about this part of my life? So important that from the beginning all the way to the top titles, you've got that sort
Yes.
of same curiosity, interest. Step back and think about it before you leap. Where is your time going and why? And you have choice. You have
Yes.
choice.
Yes,
So
we
important.
do.
I love that. How do people find you if they're looking to connect, if they are wanting to explore more of what you're doing in these spaces?
So you can find me mostly on LinkedIn. So Lillian Liang Emlet over on LinkedIn. But our website is transforminghealthcarecoaching.com. I also have a podcast by the same name, Transforming Healthcare Coaching, and you can find us on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. That's probably the easiest way to find me. And to email is just hello at transforminghealthcarecoaching.com. And we have a newsletter. You can stay in the loop for all the things like we like to talk about to give little tips about leadership and well-being and how they intertwine in a clinician's life.
Love that. And what have we not talked about that we should talk about before we end?
I would say that I think a lot of people I meet are always like curious about coaching and aren't sure like how they can decide which one is the right one for them. And at the same time, they're a little bit hesitant and scared. And I would just say contact the coach. Almost 100% of us, I would like to say, offer a free 30-minute assessment just to begin a conversation. Because it just begins with just talking to see whether we're the right personality fit. I will warn you, we ask a lot of questions. So coaches ask questions because we want you to rethink maybe some assumptions that are so entrenched, and then to begin to think about whether you have data to support it and realize what could it hurt to just maybe do something different. We'll find out, right? And then to
Mhm.
also know that we got your back too. You know what I mean? Because if an experiment doesn't work, no big deal. We'll try a different experiment next week. We'll hold you accountable to that. And so it just starts with a free consultation, 30 minutes, and just to chat. And so I think almost every coach does that. And so it never hurts just to reach out to anyone you're thinking about, whether they're a good fit for you.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for this conversation, Lillian. It's been great to understand how to reframe that thinking about our roles from all aspects of our lives and journeys.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone, have a great rest of the week. See you next time. Hey, if you found this podcast episode helpful, I would encourage you to like and subscribe. Every time you do, you help a colleague or friend find our podcast, and it can help them too. Don't forget to share it along with your friends. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget we have Charting Champions for physicians and Smarter Charting for nurse practitioners and other clinicians to help you get home with your work done. We are helping you create sustainable clinical medicine. Thanks for listening.